Welcome back to Meet the Middle here at Business and Pleasure. I'm excited to have Mark from Studio North, principal and co-founder, and excited to be in this space that we worked on together, man. It's still such a beautiful space, and I love having this here, but I also love coming here. Like, such a great community hub, man.
Totally. Yeah, we're proud of it.
Yeah.
It's exciting to always revisit it and see, that it's alive and it's functioning the way that we had always planned for.
Yeah, no, your team did an exceptional job, obviously. So yeah, shout out to you guys for that. But Mark, tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and kind of what you do, and fill us in, man.
Yeah, so Studio North, we do architectural design. We started back in 2013 in Calgary. Matt is the other co-founder, met in architecture school in Halifax, and Matt, in his thesis, was really focused on the idea of laneway housing in Calgary. I had a chance to go and teach architecture in the Gambia in West Africa, and that's where I learned about family compounds, which really I think those two things came together and created something really exciting and special that we brought to Calgary and started to really implement and try to find a way to sort of like challenge housing typologies in Calgary. And so laneway housing was kind of like we were the poster boys for laneway housing.
Yeah.
People called us the Backstreet Boys because, we were like 20-something and really ambitious and excited about this idea. So we'd be going to council and talking about it. And, and I think we really got some traction. And, I think it's evolved a lot over the last, I guess it's been 12 years, 11 years. So, and so I'm excited to be here to talk about middle housing and, how that's going to be sort of a big part of Calgary.
Yeah, I feel like you guys, no question, were pioneering. That's fascinating that you kind of came with it from this kind of African multi-generational compound housing approach. That's really cool because I love those stories that like kind of create those moments of change. And so, obviously 10 years of laneway, even before I think anyone called it gentle density or middle housing. Tell me about the evolution. Like, obviously, the first one, the second one, and we were just talking about what it's like now. So tell us a bit about where's your headspace at? Because so many people are talking about laneways as what can solve the housing crisis. I think it's become a little bit of a political, like, oh, why don't we just allow for laneways and it'll solve the crisis? And I feel like you would know better than most of us what can and can't happen.
Yeah, for sure. Well, every week I talk to many, many people that are interested in laneway housing, and just to, educate and talk through like the prospect of doing a laneway house. And, over the years, like our first one that we did was the Withrow House, which ended up getting a Lion Award because we also did preservation on the actual heritage house. And that was a big part of what we were trying to achieve as well, is like maintaining this sort of like, historic fabric of these neighborhoods that, like people are really sensitive to that, just like 100%. Maintaining that character. That's what defines their neighborhoods, and they don't want to see that destroyed. So, for us, it was like, okay, well, we could do all those things and like, keep this neighborhood sort of intact in a way by doing laneway housing. So our first one was the Withrow laneway, and that was our own development. So we bought the Withrow because no developer would touch it because it was designated. And we built the laneway behind it. And just to get people excited about like, wow, laneway housing is cool. Like, look at what you can do. It's contextual. It doesn't feel like it's like, this big scary thing that's like overshadowing and causing all this grief for neighbors. It's like this really nice, sensitive way of developing a neighborhood. So we built that one, and from then we got a lot of momentum and started to do them for clients. And once we did our first one for a client, we began to realize, like it's really expensive to build a laneway house and really complex, right?
Yeah.
Like you're having to dig deep utilities, like trench along side yards, try to maintain the existing house, and integrate this full house. It's just smaller in the backyard, and it's a lot of effort, And so we found that it was really hard to like get just the everyday person to be able to like do one of these, even though they really wanted one. It was really hard to make it work financially. Usually, it was the problem. But I think everybody that calls has something in common. It's about laneway housing and how it can really allow for their lifestyle to evolve and change and still like keep them rooted in their community. So, people really like a certain neighborhood and they're like, okay, well, we're getting older, we're retiring, like we don't need this much space. We don't want to live in a condo. What about a laneway house? Like we can move into the laneway house, rent out the main house to a young family that'll subsidize our life expenses, and it'd be great. But it just kind of comes down to the cost. So a big thing like right now, a laneway house, I'm telling people for construction is around $450,000 just for construction.
Just for a single laneway.
Just a single laneway
How big
house.
would that be?
So like, we'll push it like 750 square feet. You can kind of push it a little bit further than that, like within 10%. But that's kind of like around what you can expect. Now, like Studio North, we're really design focused. So if you went to a contractor and got like kind of like a more sort of base level design, you could probably do it cheaper. But like that's kind of what you would expect to pay for a laneway house with Studio North, plus soft costs. So add another 50, 60,000 to that, just for permitting, design, engineering, all the sort of other things. So that price is just like really unattainable for a lot of people. And it's too bad because like we would love to find a way to densify and allow for these lifestyles that people want in their neighborhoods. So
yeah, it's so interesting you're saying that because when obviously Mark, my background, I've been doing middle housing for over a decade as well, and the one thing that I've started to come to realize is like, yeah, these people who live within these communities that have these homes need a place to age in place. And so why I was always excited about middle housing is like, how do we find a way for them to take this opportunity and benefit from the financial upside of being part of this process, but also be able to live in one of those units and maybe have their kids live in one of those units or their grandparents. And so I think like we have a similar ethos in terms of the customers that you were seeing and how you were trying to serve them. I just think the challenge would be like having $500,000 is hard. But now with the government programs that we were talking about off the air, the CMHC, MLI Select, if they can hit a certain amount of rental units, not only can you have the financial capacity, but you also create more housing and a certain amount of affordable housing. And so talk to me about a bit about your transition. Like you guys are now doing middle housing. We talked about the good weather. Like obviously that's different for you guys and getting into something a little bit different. But before you do that, I want to ask you about this community preservation thing, because that's where you started. Where are you at now with that when you think about projects like good weather and what's happening in the city? Because I feel like you guys were pioneering in that concept as well.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a need to preserve heritage, and there's a place for that, and I think there's really like intact heritage houses that really should be preserved. But that doesn't mean that it should just stay that sort of single house typology. Like maybe there's 2 laneway houses built behind it, or maybe you can develop the basement of that heritage house. So there's ways to densify. There's really good examples in Vancouver where they were able to preserve and densify kind of simultaneously. So, I think, and that I would personally, like, I know that the support is there from the city, just having a heritage house myself and going through the designation process and knowing that there's grants available to really help with that preservation process. But adding a layer to that preservation, thinking about how you can, densify and allow for more housing on that piece of land, I think is totally reasonable and possible. So I think there's a place for that. Yep. But I also think that, fully new developments, like middle housing type developments, also is really critical in how our neighborhoods are going to evolve and how that fabric's going to sort of add another layer. So that, we can densify, but we can also really acknowledge the diversity of the people that live in these neighborhoods. So, there's elders, there's students, there's, young professionals, there's families, there's people with mobility struggles. So, I think there's like a way that middle housing really facilitates that diversity. And I think, our neighborhoods and our whole city needs to acknowledge that our city is going to change. It has to evolve, and middle housing is going to happen where it should happen. Like I don't think because we blanket rezone, like we're going to see every house torn up, and it
won't even work.
Yeah, it won't.
Yeah.
Like I think that we're going to see it happen where it needs to happen, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it goes back to what you were talking about with laneways. It's like you guys have arrived at this place that laneways are more expensive. They're harder to do. it takes a really specific niche client to be able to do that because you're fielding inquiries because everyone's excited by the idea. And it's funny, I think middle becomes more approachable than even a laneway at this point in terms of the cash requirements and how to deliver it.
Totally.
And so I know there's a lot of people out there and municipalities, because we're working with them across Canada, that are saying like laneways everywhere is going to help solve the housing crisis. But maybe give me your take on that. Like basically,
yeah. I don't think they will. Like, I think you're basically adding one dwelling to quite often like a 50 by 120 lot. And it's like, is that going to be enough, to really address this larger problem? So I think middle housing is just sort of an intensification of that idea where, but it's staying within that same line of thinking where, laneway housing I've realized is very homeowner driven, where it's like a homeowner wants to do this development so that it's going to accommodate their family. So like middle housing is very much in line with that, It's not like developers are, really thinking about necessarily, I think they could, but like the ROI and it's like square footage and maximizing that. I think the big thing with middle housing and the way we think about it is like making quality space that's very versatile and something that can sort of evolve, and evolve with people's lifestyles. So, if your way of living changes, you have kids, or you get married, you have an option to stay in that same place, but just like maybe move to a different dwelling within that middle development. So
yeah, I love that you guys are like coming into the space, because the one of the biggest challenges I think I see and why communities are so afraid is like we start to see a bunch of rinse and repeat models, which I don't think are necessarily a bad thing, so long as the framework of the models are correct, right? Like they're doing the things that are what I would say are important from an architectural and planning perspective. I was talking to Kayla as well about, can you actually design something that is affordable? Because we all say we can or want it, and I've been trying for many years, struggled. Not only have I struggled to do it, but I've also upset people at the same time because their premise of what was being designed didn't meet the neighborhood the way that I thought it did. And so, or, I pushed the boundary too far. But I feel like with you guys, like everyone loves your work. I'm sure there might be people that don't, but for the most part, I feel like we're all fans. But do you see a world in which more of your style of architecture and design could happen at an affordable rate more widely?
What I think we bring to the table is like, we're pragmatic and we think about through the process of design, like how it's going to be built, because we built for 10 years and we know what it takes to build. So it kind of humbles us as designers, it's like we built it and we're like, holy crap, like maybe we've got to think differently about design. So it's like a full circle, like we learned to be better designers because we built things, right? So the way that we think about design is really like practical. And we always like really think hard about context. Like for Sunnyside, our good weather project, like we're really exploring the idea of ornamentation, but like keeping the building really simple. It's just like, it's a simple form. There's not too many bump outs and bump ins and, and it's like, those are the things that add to the construction costs. Like if you keep like minimize corners, minimize bump outs, bump ins, but really think about how you can sort of like make it kind of quirky that, Sunnyside has this character and you have to acknowledge that in what you're going to do there, right? Like it has to fit that sort of language. And so, we really explored like the different things that happen in Sunnyside and all this sort of heritage there. And the way they built back then was very, very pragmatic and really simple. And so like keeping in line with that, like it makes a lot of sense as a developer to think that way as well, right? And same in the 60s, like they just like slammed housing in. But now those are houses that we all are like, those are awesome houses, So like how do we sort of maybe think about it that way too?
Yeah,
so,
it's a good point. Like the Eichlers are a great example of someone that, went and did 1,000 or whatever it was in California, and now they're like sought out after. And so that idea of like, how do we come up with a model that works, do it well, and then actually one day it's going to be this thing we all sought out after.
Yeah.
So obviously your practice and the studio has evolved quite a bit. Maybe we were talking a bit offline about the things you're working on, but yeah, tell us a bit about what is next. What are you guys doing?
Well, I could kind of tell you a little bit more about the good weather. So that's in Sunnyside. Yeah. What we're aiming to achieve there is 8 dwellings. So there's 4 on the ground level, and they're barrier free, so they're at grade. So they're really addressing, the idea of downsizing, aging in place, elderly, mobility impaired. So there's that idea. And then above that is 2 or 3 bedroom houses. So really thinking about young families, young professionals. And so really having that diversity of housing, and then having a courtyard, and really thinking about like these different dwelling types having an opportunity to form a community of their own. And like, it's really about like quality of space, and I think that's what people really want to see from a development, because I think recently it's been maybe straying away from that a little bit. It's like, what's the ROI? Like, how are we going to come through for our investors? And then they don't even really care about quality space. They don't really acknowledge that people are actually going to live in these spaces, right? So like, I don't think that's the right way to go about development. It's really about like thinking about the human aspect. It's like people want to feel good living in these spaces. So how can you really allow for a community to form and ownership? Like people want to feel like this house is part of their life, right?
No.
So like for us, we really want to make these spaces where people can kind of, cross paths and like form relationships. And so these sort of, the idea of the courtyard and like entries facing the courtyard. So like, there's this, instead of them facing away from each other, so like we're really kind of exploring those ideas and in how we go about development.
It's funny, it comes back to this whole idea of multi-generational and the compound that you talked about
exactly
from your work. So I love that it's come full circle. I guess maybe just as we kind of get to a wrap here, 2 things I wanted to ask you is, what are you excited about, amidst the housing crisis, and what are you most concerned about as kind of things start to kind of move here and from what you've seen?
Yeah, well, I'm excited for our city to keep on thriving, and for just like this new housing typology to really be sort of accepted into our fabric.
The citywide rezoning, specifically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just seeing that evolve and being implemented in a really good way, like by yourself and us, I think are good examples. And in terms of like what I'm worried about, it's just like, I just hope parking isn't always going to be the thing that
I love that,
like undoes everything. Cause like cars, like that's really important space that we give up for cars, And I think we have to get beyond that thinking. Like you look in Europe, there's all these cities that don't have such a focus. It's because like Calgary has always been so like, it's such a young city. Our whole city was designed around cars and infrastructure. So it's really hard to get away from that. But, you go to these really old cities that are ancient, like they never had cars, and the whole fabric of those places aren't designed around cars, right? And it has a different feel. You go to these places and it's like, it feels right because it's like about the human and how the human like actually inhabits this space, not how a car inhabits a space. So like, I just don't want like our city to keep on evolving around the car.
Yeah,
is my concern.
And I love it. I love how you close on parking in the car. I thought you were going to talk about building codes or construction, but like
that's a whole other.
No, it's cool. It's cool that you chose that, because I think that is so core to so much of what you talk about is the lifestyle, what you're trying to promote. You guys have been primarily working in remote and kind of like established neighborhoods. And so it really aligns well with your values. So that's awesome, man. Well, I'm excited to kind of watch the progress and watch Good Weather. Hopefully you guys will join the community and share.
Yeah, no, I'm excited about Middle and what you guys are doing. It's what the city needs. So.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, thanks for joining me, Mark. Yeah, we'll tune in soon, guys, for the next one. Take care.